going to invite you to write and talk to each other, which Teresa just said, shoot, you're going to make us write? I'm like, well, it's a writing workshop. So yes, I'm going to invite you to write. I'm thinking about these segments as kind of a big step back and thinking about literacy in the world, then literacies in your disciplines, and then literacies more honed in the classroom. So that's kind of our cycle. I didn't plug in like some obvious break in our morning, so I'm assuming that you will break as needed and go. I won't be if like I've said something offensive and you've left the room. So that's part of our work today. So I'm part of the National Writing Project. I direct the Northern California Writing Project. It's been around for 45 or so years. We don't do anything without starting by writing. And we call it writing into the day. And so I am going to invite you to do a little bit of writing and talking with each other. And whenever I talk about the teaching of writing, I really can't do it without thinking about learning and how people learn. So I'm going to ask you to think about something you've learned to do well outside of school. So for me, that would be baking, clearly. I know how to bake and eat the baking. And when I think about how I learned to bake, I can think about the material conditions and the people that were involved in that. It's not about reading a recipe, right, like a textbook. It's about standing in the kitchen with your grandmothers who are showing you what dough should feel like through your fingers, right? It should feel like peas. It should feel like peas as you're making that dough. It's the smells. It's having a pie plate. It's about substituting that roller for a bottle of wine when you don't have a roller at a cabin, right? Like there's a lot of material things that go into that learning. And so I'm going to invite you to do that. And maybe it's something for you that you're a really good community organizer, or you can play the piano or the guitar, but something outside of school. Because my intention is also to remind you that learning is as natural as breathing, and that as humans, we're actually quite good at it. And sometimes school makes us feel like we're not. But really, it's a natural thing. We will learn something. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes or so to just kind of write to that prompt, and then I'll ask you to talk to each other and see if we can pull out some of the material conditions. And I'll write with you. So I'm going to invite you to tease out with the colleagues at your table. Share your writing and try to figure out what the material conditions are that make this learning, this thing you know how to do, possible. Is it about a particular space? Is it about particular tools? Probably be hard to learn the piano without a piano, for example. Maybe. I think maybe not, but maybe. Were there people? Were there mentors involved that help you to learn that thing? So together, if you could share, here's the thing I know how to do, and here's how I learned to do it, I think we could start to tease out like the bigger categories of like, yeah, here are the things you need to learn something. You need these kinds of things. So I'm going to invite you to talk to those other humans at your table. Okay, y'all. There's going to be no good place to interrupt your conversations all day. I know that. And I'm going to try to honor the tables of 2 with the tables of 5 that are sharing. Could we share out just a few things that were, for example, I heard someone say practice, the things that help with learning. Can we share out a few and just get a few up here? Yeah, David.
So one thing that Teresa said that I think summed up our conversation really well was that learning is a social endeavor.
Yeah. Nice. Very social. And yet, we have students wrestle one-on-one all the time, right, with tests and stuff. Yeah, Donna.
We have 2 people talk about trial and error.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. It's always that moment at the end of the semester where you're like, do I remember how to spell anything? When you're up on the board, right? Like, notice I didn't write endeavor because I was like, E-A-V, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Different learning style.
Yeah, different ways of learning, right? Yeah. Which some people will call styles. Yeah.
Taking your time.
Yeah, right? Learn to write a chemistry paper in 13 weeks, right? Like time, yeah. Mark? Yeah, and then Kathy. Yeah, sorry.
Access to experts or at least people who know more than you do.
Yeah. To either some more capable peer or an expert or something. Kathy.
I don't
Yeah, there's, I think maybe a little offshoot, right? Like people next to you.
In mine, I was talking about how I learned to take care of my birds.
Oh, yeah.
And so they taught me.
Yeah. So that's good. So a lot of people will call that, Kathy, affinity groups, right? You have affinity groups that you're a part of that help you learn the language of that particular context. I have a colleague who's a mountain unicyclist. Unicycle on a mountain bike, for real, like up the hills and, you know. And they have this whole network where they talk about like which tire is the best for this kind of rock and slap on a gas and he would call that, you know, an affinity group that he's a part of.
Or not formal learning.
Yeah, not formal learning. Yes, yeah.
So that's this is the breakdown of what I have students go through when they do their PLA for their prior learning assessment.
Yeah,
You have to extract. You realize that you don't really know what informs you, like what taught you.
yes.
You really dig deep.
Yeah, you do.
And it's like in the weird part of your brain.
I asked Tom if he talked about playing the piano, and he said, I don't remember. Like, it's so long ago, I don't remember how I got started. Or even a lot of us will say, do I remember how I learned how to read, like, specifically, you know? Feelings, sort of feelings. There was a hand over there. Was it Scott? Yeah.
Success. I think that if you don't have success in something, you'll lose interest.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so, too. As much as failure is a part of it, at some point, you're not going to do a thing that someone keeps telling you you're not very good at, or that you don't feel like you're getting any footing on, right? Whoops, as I trip. That was weird. Footing, trip, yeah. Yeah. Karen.
Persistence through
Yeah.
when you get stuck or frustrated.
Yeah.
And sometimes that has to come from outside. Like for me, it was my dad forcing me to drive the stick shift up a hill.
Oh, that's good.
He did do it. I hated it.
Yeah. Yeah. We call that choose the danger. Hashtag choose the danger. Yeah. So this is a great list that we can keep working off as we're like rethinking some of the writing assignments potentially. And one of the things I would ask is, how does your classroom or your teaching match the ways in which you learn to do something well? Are those elements a part? And I know we have a lot of constraints in formal education, like time, for example, or benchmarks, or, you know, all the constraints get in there too that sometimes don't get in the way of learning outside of school. Although if we're talking about access and equity, they certainly do, right, all the time outside of school. And the thing that I ask myself all the time is, would my students recognize the reading and writing we do outside our class in the world? Is it a writing practice that exists in the discipline or in the planet? Or is it school writing? And I try to avoid school writing as much as I can. In fact, I try to avoid solving the problems of school. Attendance, whether they've read or not, these are not interesting problems to me. Those are the problems of schooling. Those are not the problems of my discipline. And when students are engaged in their own inquiries, the problems of schooling tend to fall away. Attendance problems fall away. When they're pursuing something they're interested in, the reading that becomes not as much of a problem when they're reading something because they're dying to understand something. We can, some of those, not all the time, obviously, but sometimes we can solve those problems. So I'm hoping you'll kind of hold that in your, like, okay, well, when we're going to return to some of these ideas. So I'm going to break this down, like I said, in kind of three parts. And I'm going to back way out of the classroom in this first segment because I do want to think about literacy in the world. And because I study digital culture and digital literacies, of course, what often happens is we're worried, right? We're worried about students. Dawn and I had a conversation at Pizza the other night, right, about texting and stuff. And we've been worried about writing since we invented writing. Plato, about 370 BC, has that whole conversation between Socrates and his student, you know, in the Phaedrus. And this writing thing, we're not going to have memory anymore. Just anybody, oh my goodness, could read anything. No one will be interrogating that text. There will be no speaker to respond back to that text. Once written down, these speeches are tumbled about anywhere among those who may or may not understand them, and know not to whom they should reply, to whom not. And if they are maltreated or abused, meaning the text, they have no parent to protect them. They cannot defend or protect themselves. So I'm going to say Plato was like the first, get off my lawn, literacy. I think he'd be a fan of like reading levels. I think he'd hate texting. Like every new generation has we're always angry at the generation below us, right? We thought, French was bastardized Latin, right? Harvard got really nervous in the late 1800s because we had these students come into Harvard that we didn't recognize. Let's make a first-year composition class. We can blame Harvard. And we'll cleanse those people of that language before we send them off to the disciplines to write for real. And we inherited that for a really long time that we've been trying to undo. So I'm going to say literacies in the world are always piling up and spreading out. And it's okay. Like the kids are all right. They're going to be all right. So I'm going to step way back and I'm going to tell you actually a sad story. So you ready? I'm from Chico. Chico is 20 minutes down the hill from Paradise, where the world has been on fire, where we've lost everybody in this last year. So this is my university, Hispanic serving institution. We're about 35% Latinx students, about 60% first gen. We've been around a while. We're the second oldest in the CSU, and we always recognize the Machupta, and I'm sure Native peoples here who allow us our education. So back in November, this is the drive out from my house on the left-hand side. This is 8:30 in the morning, and the texts are just coming in that something's happening up on the ridge. So that's about 40 minutes, that view on the left-hand side. By later in the day, it's going to look like this, and by the night, my husband and I from my window can see the ridge on fire, and our families are all heading out. My children are 7th generation in Chico, and so we've been around a long time, and we have 40 acres, so we had lots of people and lots of animals coming our way to find us. And all of a sudden, we were in absolute peril, and we stayed in peril. We're still in peril. We're still in trauma, and we're still in recovery in that area. The fire moved at 80 acres a minute. To put it in perspective, Disneyland is 85 acres, so we lost a Disneyland a minute. So we lost a lot of people immediately. We lost 8 of our 9 schools. And here's the thing that'll choke me up every time. 4,200 students got off that ridge. We didn't lose one of them. Like every teacher threw kids in their cars like a clown car and got those kids out of there. So that was a big deal. But we're still reeling from the fact that Chico has now inherited about 20,000 new people to our community. We don't have enough homes. We have about 7 houses on the market right now. There's nowhere to live in Chico. So that was the numbers. Here's what happened for me as someone who studies digital literacy. About 2 weeks before the fire, I had just said to my spouse, I know I study digital literacy, but I got to get off Facebook. I hate Facebook. It doesn't do me any good. I hate it. I don't use it. I kind of look at it, but I don't like it. I use other forms. And then the fire happened, and all of a sudden, Facebook and Reddit, and I use Twitter, so I was on Twitter anyway, but Facebook became the touchstone. And those of us who had access to social media had access to all kinds of information, and we were sharing it as quickly as we could. So in those first few days, it was about saying, hey, we're shifting gears over to Glenn County EVAC because they have enough at Salvation Army. Hey, they need t-shirts over here. They need food over here. Someone needs to get over here. The animals, where are we going to put the animals? And someone was starting to rally that. And we were on our phones and in these spaces talking to each other for days. Well, we still are, trying to coordinate all these efforts. So all of a sudden, digital literacy started to play a big part in a trauma. And I was really thankful that people had them, that they understood how it works. Because I can kind of level up in digital literacies, one of the first things that happened, and I, as a literacy scholar, actually think the hashtag is one of the most profound things to happen. Chris Mesner in 2007 decides to use the hashtag at South by Southwest. Black Lives Matter, Me Too, right? It brings things to the forefront. So immediately there was a campfire hashtag, which had happy campfire things. It was an unfortunate name, right? Because campfire, you can't have a campfire. And then there was, rightly so, people all over that social media with thoughts and prayers, wishing us well, hoping we're okay. So trying to find information in that stream of that campfire hashtag became so challenging. I know how to create a list on Twitter, so I immediately made a Twitter list, which allows me to curate that hashtag. So I threw in 26 people that were things like the sheriff and CAL FIRE and officials that I knew were putting out helpful information. And then I could just look at that feed and find exactly what I needed. And I had tons of people who were starting to share this feed and tweet it out. So again, you can say all you want about these kids on Twitter or these kids on texting, but I'm telling you, in a moment of time, it depends on the context. Like, I'm glad people know how to do these things. Our feeds immediately became full of GoFundMes, Donors Choose, Amazon wish lists. Our local Sierra Nevada brewery in Chico started the Resilience Beer, which they've now, $15 million in donations have come through to our community. It's, believe it or not enough. And like I said, the GoFundMes are still going. Our community college and my campus immediately went into action. In fact, our administration, our president, and everybody met every day for 9 months, Saturdays, Sundays, every day, to try to solve. We had 300 students without homes, and so trying to solve that problem and get everybody housed. So after spinning out, I think all of us realized we were in this for a marathon and not a sprint, and I think the smart move we've made since then is you have to work in your wheelhouse. So for people who know how to do things with animals, they've put all their energy there. I happen to work with students and teachers, so I've put all my energy there. So the woman here in the middle is my cousin Monica, who's a kindergarten teacher. She put a very simple flyer out on Facebook, said, color a classroom. We had all these teachers from Paradise who had lost homes, their car, and their school. And all these people wanting to donate to them, but they had nowhere to put the materials. And that was really hard, right? And they were about to go teach at Osh Hardware Store, the old Lynn's Crafters, the airport, a local church, another school, but they had nowhere to put all their supplies. So we started Color a Classroom and gave them a warehouse space and a liaison so that you and I'd be your liaison. You could just say, I need Fisker scissors. Very important scissors for little kids, they work best. And I'd be like, let me go to the donors and get you those, and I will bring them to you. Instead of 900 people saying, let me give you a book or a t-shirt or a thing you don't need. So we've continued this. We have about 146 teachers that we work with as we're trying to keep them supplied with a lot of Amazon wish lists. The community's been amazing to rally. We have experts on our campus that were called to the forefront. We happen to have one of the best forensic anthropologist groups in the country, happens to be located at Chico State. And this has been brutal for them because they've done all the identification of the bodies and they're still working. Colleen, who I came in with 10 years ago to my college, made a deal with the media that she would do a spot for PBS NewsHour if they would then leave them alone because they were just being stalked by paparazzi who wanted to talk to them as they were trying to honor that they were finding people's families. Could you just leave us alone for a minute? After a while, what we realized is beyond digital literacies, you also need poets and artists who can help bear witness and make sense of the event. So my very best friend, Sarah Pape, who's an amazing creative writer, was tapped by the New York Times, and she's continued to write for them, telling the nation what's going on with our community. And then my husband's cousin, Shane, is a graphic designer and an artist, and he is from Paradise, so he's gone up and done these beautiful murals with the permissions of the families, so that there's some semblance of beauty in the midst of this rubble. So the last thing I'll say about this is that our campus was closed for about 15 days, and I had students who had gone off home for those 15 days. They went to the Bay Area, they went back to LA. They weren't all local, obviously. And while they would have felt the effects of the air quality anywhere in California, they wouldn't have been immune to that. They didn't know what they were stepping back into when they came to campus. The town was now full of tents and RVs and homeless people. And they stepped back into trauma and didn't really understand. It was really disorienting for them. So I was trying to think of ways, I'm always thinking of ways to connect my students to real things that are going on in the world. And the Paradise teacher said, we need our stories to be heard. We really still need more supplies, but I can't tell it. I can't tell the story right now. So I paired them, about 50 teachers came to my class. I paired them with Chico State students, and our students wrote blogs about those teachers, in whatever thing they wanted to share, about their recovery, Sometimes we'd link to their Amazon wish list or whatever they needed for support, and that was an amazing connection for my future teachers to see what teaching can really be like and how amazing these other educators were, and then for those teachers to have their stories told, and then we just release them every few weeks. I'm going to go back to this for a sec. So if we're thinking about literacy in the world, and back to that question, does your classroom look anything like the practices outside of school? I'm certainly not going to make a case that you should have all your students on Twitter, but I do think that there's ways that you can honor the literacies that the students bring with them from the outside, and especially for young adults and adolescents, when we disparage their literacies, when we say video games are bad, or Twitter's bad, or texting is bad, literacy is so much of an identity work, right? That you're saying you're bad. So that back to like, I need someone to say I'm okay with literacies is also, well, that's really interesting. How do you use it? What do you use it for? How do you communicate with your family? I wonder how we can incorporate that into our classroom practice. So I'm going to have you write again in a minute. I'm going to switch to, so that's a sad story, but literacies in the world were really helpful, and they continue to be helpful. So I wanted to switch to literacies in your disciplines. I have the biggest argument with my science faculty about the Oxford comma, which I'm a fan of. And I had to read our 190-page book manuscript looking for the third comma because my colleagues left it out, but Teachers College Press wanted it in, and you can't find an invisible comma in a find and search. So I had to honor that the editor wanted the third comma and read the thing for the comma. So these things matter. These always matter. So I'm going to do a little bit of here's what composition literacy tells us, and then invite you to write again. And the science faculty who were with us on Tuesday are going to recognize some of this, and we'll continue that conversation. And it's back to kind of the thing Teresa said to me at the beginning about chemistry and biology, and how sometimes the papers, like they're not being asked to do the same things, and that's right. They're not, right? They're different practices. So this is a hard pill to swallow sometimes. I know we really, really want to believe that there's something about writing that is basic and that I can teach them in first year comp, but there isn't. There isn't anything basic about writing. Maybe the comma, maybe. But we're still going to get in a debate about whether it's an Oxford comma or not an Oxford comma, right? It's actually really hard to have writing transfer. You have to learn to write in the community of practice that use writing in that way. Because what counts as knowing, what counts as evidence, what counts as a claim are different in different disciplines. Geographers will say, show me a pretty map. I don't care about that 20-page MLA formatted paper. Where's your map? Can I read the map? And for them, that's disciplinary literacy, right? And it's an ongoing process learned over and over and over again. You may get them somewhere in your class, but you won't see the full. It might be 10 years, it might be 5 years. Think how long it takes us to get a footing in our disciplines, right, and understand how to do things in our field with writing. So I think one of the most compelling analogy that people kind of get is this quote from David Russell. So I'm going to read it to you. He writes a lot about activity theory, part of social learning theories. To try to teach students to improve their writing by taking a general writing skills course is something like trying to teach people to improve their ping pong, jacks, volleyball, basketball, field hockey, and so on by attending a course in general ball using. Such a course would of necessity have a problem of content. What kinds of games, and therefore ball use skills, should one teach? And how can one teach ball using skills unless one also teaches students the games, since the skills have their motive in meaning only in terms of a particular game or games that use them? It's why you go from chemistry to biology and you say, why are you picking up the ball? We don't hold the ball in this game. You hit the ball with something else. And the student's like, but I was taught in that other class that you pick up the ball. I know, we don't do that here. And it gets really confusing because every time they think they have a skill down, like, but that MLA, that's the thing I know, then they got to use LaTeX with David. Like, there's always going to be a new formatting structure. Maybe what we can help them do is understand that there are these big categories, like there's a thing called citation. It is different in different disciplines. You should ask what it is in your discipline and why. Why do you do things that particular way? So this is what makes teaching writing hard, and it's why you can't avoid teaching it. You can't hand it off to the English faculty because we're not going to get them cleaned up for chemistry or biology or math. We're just not. I don't know what you do in your disciplines. I can help them feel confident. I can help them understand that we do research in the university and here's some interesting research practices. I can tell them there are citation practices, and in the humanities you tend to use this, and in the sciences you tend to use this. I can do a lot of meta stuff, but they ain't going to be all cleaned up by the time they get to your class. So I'm going to have you go back to a little bit of writing and talking. I'm wondering if you could just try to generate a list about some of the informal writing practices that I bet we all hide from our students. So when we say write the final paper, we don't often show them that that paper I wrote for a journal started 2 years ago on the back of an envelope. And then it was in my head in the car. And then I talked to a colleague in the hallway, and then I said, hey, what book are you reading about that? And then I have a Google Doc that's really messy, and so at some point it becomes a thing that looks like a piece of writing, right? So, and I was saying to the scientists the other day, this informal writing is actually really disciplinary. So it's not just always a quick write, and the example I gave, and I think it works well, is when I started working with a physicist and the biology professor to think about the teaching of writing in science, they came into my office. They were arguing about light and how light works. Biologist, physicist, they come at this from very different things. And they got into my office and said, where's your whiteboard? I don't have a whiteboard. I'm in the humanities. We have pen and paper. And they grabbed an envelope and they started jotting, graphs and charts down. That's informal writing for them. Putting things on a whiteboard is an informal writing practice. That's not an informal writing practice in my field. I do other things that are informal. So I'm going to have you try to make a list of, what are the informal writing practices? And one way you could think of it is just to break down something that you've written and think about, okay, where did that start? Did I phone a friend for a model? How did I figure out how to do it? So I'm going to invite you to kind of write to that for a minute, and then you can share out. Questions about that, what I'm asking here? Okay. Maybe some amount of time I will watch. And by the way, this is hard. Like if you get stumped, this is actually hard because we get so good in our disciplines we don't remember. It's the same thing about I don't remember how I learned the piano. You're like, what are my informal writing practices? So don't be surprised if you're like, I don't know. It'll take a minute. So with the people around you, see if you can even make a longer list of what some of the informal writing practices are. Because I bet if you share some with each other, you'll be like, oh yeah, we do that too. Oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. So share some. What are your informal practices? Or what's your drafting process would be another way to think about it. How do you draft? So you all are having such rich conversations at your tables that I think it would be good to get those out in the room. They're real, I can hear them and they're really good. I'm going to put Karen on the spot just so she knows what I meant. Cindy and I were having a little side conversation here a minute ago, and we were saying one of the things that's so hard. You should say what you said about tacit learning.
Well, I think one of the things is that when I did my dissertation, I went to faculty and I said, how do you know that they know? And it was dead air. Dead air. Because we carry so much in our mind that's tacit. In other words, we're going on autopilot and we have no idea we know how to riding a bike.
Yeah.
A lot of people can't articulate how they learn how to ride a bike.
Right.
But you carry around all this tacit knowledge that you can't extract.
Yeah.
And that's what some of this is hard, and you're kind of pulling it out.
Yes. And we were saying it's really hard for newcomers to our fields when we aren't actually very good at explaining anymore. The further we get away from being a newcomer, the worse we actually get at being able to say how we learn to do something. It's why they are so conscious of it. And even ask questions about page length, which can seem like a trivial question. Sometimes, I'm like, as long as it needs to be. I think a lot of us say. And yet, no, every time I just had to write a report for Senate, and I've never had to do that before. What do you think the first question I asked was? How long are they usually? I mean, are we talking 2 pages or 9? Like, I need to understand the scope. Like, it's a real question that I'm asking. What's the page length here in this context I'm standing in? Is actually really hard. So you had great conversations about some of this informal stuff, and I heard Karen talking about even the practice of writing to a text or the notes that we make for ourselves that we don't always, students just think they're doing it for us, right? Like, how many annotations do you want? Yeah. So if you could talk about your practice, you were having some good conversations, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Well, so one of the things that came up at our table is that we were talking about, we actually talked about who's an introvert and who's an extrovert and who needs what kind of interlocutor to get the writing process started. And I was saying that for me, it's the text that is
That's
my
interesting.
interlocutor.
Yes. Yeah.
For me, it's writing in the margins, that's having that conversation with the book itself.
Yeah.
I don't always have to talk to someone else, but that wasn't true for everyone at my table.
Right.
Sometimes you have to be speaking with a colleague to get the ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
I
Yeah.
call myself a kinesthetic reader because that's exactly
Yeah.
what I do.
Yeah.
I meld with whatever I'm reading, and I've got notes on the side, and I underline. And
Yes.
as the thoughts come through, I'll put them on the paper. And
I can't even read anymore without something in my hand.
That's what I said.
Right? Like I've heard Toni Morrison say that even her own novel, she still has a pencil, and she's like making changes, in the margins, which makes me feel a little better, a lot better. Right? There's a point where I'm like, I can't read this, and I'm like, it's just a Sunset magazine. You're probably good. You probably don't need to annotate that, but there's something about that. So what were other informal practices?
I'm going to share another one.
Yeah, please.
So when she's reading, how's this? I'm the third person. When she's reading a book, she writes the notes, a summary of the text in the right-hand side of the paper, and the left-hand side she puts down her ideas.
Oh,
So then
yeah,
she knows
that's
these are my
awesome.
ideas, this is the-
Yes,
yeah, I put my ideas in brackets.
that's awesome.
It's more visual. I need like spatial.
Yeah, no, that's
But some tricks for knowing this is me, this is the text.
Right.
This is me, this is the text. A lot of us are taught this with data collection too, right? Field notes, like one side is the actual thing I'm seeing and the other side is my analysis or interpretation so I don't come all conflated. Yeah.
I want to thank you. My brain is going popcorn right
Oh,
now.
good, good. Oh, thank goodness.
Discipline of nursing. It is all so prescriptive.
Yeah.
APA will be on my gravestone.
A running header.
That you freed me. I was not in your previous classes, so I'll go through them. But I think if I would help my students through this thought process, I would know much more about them.
Yeah.
And be honest with them, and I'd know much more about myself. And I think it would be an engagement piece. Because all we do is give them rules and regulations and rubrics in our syllabus.
Right.
And so, have you ever done any little video of yourself?
I think Tom's got it. I just had a conversation with Michael. I was like, next time I'm going to ask for a trainer and a chef so I could lose like 20 pounds before you put me on video. Forget the travel fee. I want to be down. What's interesting about that comment too is in the name of the things that help us get clear in our discipline, right? The conventions that help us are just opaque for newcomer. Like, they don't help at all. They just seem like this odd, abstract thing you want me to do that feels idiosyncratic, right? I think about how much emphasis we put in a references page or a works cited page in the name of plagiarism. Like, they only think of it in terms of, that is actually not why we are doing that in ours. We're honoring that we are in a community of practice, that these are the people I'm in dialogue with. How many times have you looked at a references or works cited page and think, yeah, I'm not going to agree with any of that. Those are not my people. And moving on. Yeah. I mean, I really do. Like, no, we're not going to. I mean, we were talking about the philosophy, kind of camps. Like, I mean, and our students don't know to do that or look for other sources. Like, you're going to find other authors in that works cited that might help you with your research, those kinds of things. And the phone a friend. How many of us are like, hey, I'm trying something new. Who would you read? Who would you go to next? I don't Google that or go to JSTOR and put in a basic search for nursing something. I would call you and be like, so where should I start? on this thing. So yeah, what are some other informal practices that show up in your fields, or how do you draft would be another. Teresa.
I was just talking about how I'm supposed to be writing a paper now. And so to
My
force
head.
myself through that process, I have committed myself to doing oral presentations and poster presentations because it's not the writing paper,
Yeah.
but I still have to scaffold the ideas
Yes.
and connect them in a story
Yes.
and tell it.
Yes.
And then I've done the oral presentation. Next weekend I'm going to go and do the poster presentation.
Yep.
And those are two different communities. I'm going to get feedback from my colleagues. I
Yes.
can have that conversation. But I find that those two formats help me outline as well as holding my references
Yeah.
and my ideas and my flow.
Yeah.
Without necessarily having paragraphs of writing.
Yeah, that's really cool. And the poster genre for the scientists, that was new to me when I started working with Leslie. And she said, I think we'll do a poster session. And I was like, you mean like a trifold that you get at Michael's? And she was like, no, man. Like, when's the last time you did science? I was like, 8th grade? I don't know. A long time ago. I didn't realize, oh, no, we're going to put this in Pages or InDesign, and we're going to make this really pretty thing, and we're going to send it off to a thing that's going to send us back. I have them hanging in my office now, like, oh my God, I made a science poster 2 times in my life. But even just looking at that genre and a way of representing data is a whole different practice than, can be a way too, but it's also a totally different practice too.
But it's hard to kind of differentiate like an oral presentation from a poster presentation because you're talking in both
Yeah.
of them. But the oral presentation for me in science is like very few words.
Yes.
Like on the slide.
Yes.
It's all data, it's all pictures, it's all
All
diagrams,
pictures, yeah.
And I'm just talking.
Yes.
So that's my first pass. And then I do the poster and I have to put more details on that because I'm not always standing next to my poster. So I
Right.
have more text.
Right.
And more explanation and more details there. That's my second pass. Right,
Yes.
on my idea arc, and I get feedback.
That's so smart.
And now I have to sit down and write it.
Yes. I mean, how smart would that be to talk to students about the reason there is more text on this is it has to stand in for you in some way. Like just that. Not because I said it has to be 500 words, but that it's functioning in a way that I'm going to try to give you the backstory to that. Yeah.
One of the things we were talking about too is with the poster, with the presentation, that being an opportunity for feedback, and
Yeah.
then things change after that. But
Yep.
for students, it's often like the end game.
Yeah,
That's it.
right.
And I was so interested that you were talking about telling a story, like a chemist telling a story about data.
Yes.
Our
Yeah.
students often think of it as like it's a paper.
Yeah.
But, you're
Yeah.
doing something.
Yeah. Yeah, the gallery walk approach to kind of, I love from science, right, of kind of sharing your ideas. Other drafting? Mark.
I would say often the side conversations that come out while you're collaborating with others. I do a lot of articles with other people.
Me
so
too.
when they're a Google Doc.
Yes.
The bubble comments on the side wind up being sometimes just as important, if not more important, than what's actually written on the text.
Yes.
Or text, or see the mentioned emails back and forth.
Yep.
All
Yes.
those sort of, the talk that goes around the
Yep.
composition.
Leslie, physicist, and I still, about once a week, Zoom, because we're still writing together, and it's often a Google Doc and our Zoom chat, right, that's open at the same time as we're collaborating on that doc. And so the platforms even, or the ways of composing are, we often choose those for students, but that's a problem too, right, that we don't allow them to use the tools that are part of their composing processes. Word, for example, costs money, and students sometimes are poor. Google's free if you have it. So those kinds of things, right, that I'm always asking my students, what do you use? What works best for you? And if you're collaborating, it changes the game entirely. Please do not send me an attached Word document back and forth in email with version 222. I'm like, I don't want to write with you anymore. What version are we on? Which one is this? I don't care how many track changes. I can't even find the sentence in the green anymore. And Google Docs, I can at least see revision history and those kinds of things. So collaboration changes it too, right? Our practices around writing. Other. Okay. So I'm going to give you some chunks of text a little bit. My apologies in advance. But I'm going to show you, I'm actually going to walk you through a little bit of how Leslie and I, the physicist, and I deconstruct kind of an assignment. And I think one of the mistakes, and I do it too, I mean, we all do this, but I think when students are struggling with a piece of writing, we think if I give them more rubrics and more instructions, it'll get better. And actually, it makes it worse. They just get more confused. Because the problem isn't the rubric, the problem is they don't have anything to say. And our job is to help them have something to say. And then they get really excited about figuring out why that rubric's that. So here's a few quotes from this text we worked on. So there's this mathematician. David, do you know this guy? I don't know this guy. Does everybody know this guy? Is this a thing? Okay. Okay, that's awesome. Leslie's like, well, of course you know this guy. In an essay I'm writing, it might seem unnecessary to insist that in order to say something well, you must have something to say, but it's no joke. Much bad writing, mathematical or otherwise, is caused by a violation of that first principle. To have something to say is by far the most important ingredient of good exposition, so much so that if the idea is important enough, the work has a chance to be immortal, even if it's confusingly misorganized and awkwardly expressed. And this is my colleague Leslie. If students cannot write a topic sentence, it's likely that they don't have a topic sentence. It doesn't matter how many times we teach them there should be a thesis if you don't have one. And I don't think that theses even work that way. If they do well on all but the analysis section of a lab report, and why report on a lab if not for the analysis, then it is likely they have no real analysis to share. These structures can help highlight that, but all the writing instruction rubrics and templates cannot give students something to say. And in fact, a lot of our disciplines walk students to known conclusions, things we already worked out, hoping they all get the same answer on that lab thing, instead of the real inquiry of what scientists do, which is to figure it out. That's the practice of a scientist or a historian or a humanist. We're trying to show them what we do in the field, not what we know in the field. Because they'll learn what we know in the field by doing the field, by actually trying that out. It's therefore critical that students have something to say. A hard-won idea that they are proud of, a unique insight they developed, a representation or a piece of evidence or a way of phrasing an idea, or even a question that helps their investigations, a question that their investigations have helped them articulate. One job of our course is to help students have ideas that they want to share. They feel compelled to share. I got to share this cool thing that I figured out. And if I could get a picture like that, I always give her shit. Like, how come physicists get cool pictures? And English people don't. So I'm going to deconstruct this paper that some of the science faculty, Sarah and Meg, are with us. Apologies in advance. I swear I'll try to say it differently. Okay, that's great. We did a little bit of this on Tuesday. So here's the end paper, and I'm going to walk you through how we get to the end paper. So we do a paper, we have a scientific inquiry class. I've taught with Leslie and Irene, they're at Boise State now, but for about 5 years. And we start the class with, is every color in the rainbow? Which is a really fun question to puzzle over. And you'll go home thinking about it tonight, I guarantee it. Is every color in the rainbow? What do you mean by color? You mean all the ingredients of color? Are there infinite number of colors, but not every color? So it'll make you puzzle. So we start with that, and we study light, color, and the eye. And the ending paper is how does the eye work? Yeah, Kathy.
Can you explain that this is a writing class and not a science class?
It's a science inquiry class that's writing intensive.
Okay.
Yeah, that's got...
Because that makes a difference, because not all of our classes will have the same...
Yeah. Yeah, Leslie uses, I would say Leslie, this is why I love it when Leslie's with me. Leslie teaches physics, she's a physicist, that she would argue has particular things she has to cover. She's still able to have room for students to have their own inquiry, even within some concepts she has to cover, for example, right? So there's still ways I think they can ask real questions in the field and sort those out. But yes, this is a writing intensive course that's science inquiry. Yep. And a lot of people say, well, how do you keep students from Googling that? How does the eye work? And you could Google that. That's really weird, strange things will come up. But they couldn't write a paper that they'd plagiarized or Googled because we do so much work in the class to support this, the paper would look weird. It would be odd that all the things we worked on in class aren't in that paper. And so then you just count, where'd this come from? We haven't talked about that idea in class at all. And the papers are pretty stunning at the end. So we start early on with them. If you've never done this before, or if you're around kids at all, it's a cool thing to do, to get a box and put it on your head. I know many of you have done this pinhole camera thing. And inside the box is across from you is a white piece of paper. And then someone pokes a hole behind you, and voila, you can see the image behind you upside down. It's really weird, actually. Like the full image is there, just from this little pinhole that's in the back. So that they come back in immediately and start diagramming that. Like, what is going on? How come I can see the tree behind me on this piece of paper in front of me? That's just weird. And they get into debates of like, was it in color? I don't know. Was it? Trying to figure that out. We do a lot of times as a way to introduce peer response and that you give feedback to your colleagues. We use a practice called silent science, where they will come in and diagram something or put some definitional work, and then they pass that around. So at this table, you just keep passing that piece of paper, and it comes back to you with a bunch of people's feedback on it, so that when we go to give feedback on those larger papers, we've done this practice many, many times. So this is a student's first attempt at diagramming what happened outside, and the peer says, so I think you're saying, and they re-diagram it for them because the person has left the tree off. They've written the tree over here, but not here. And they start giving each other kind of like, I agree with this, but what about this? And are you saying the light ray comes from here? You're not being really precise. And then they get a chance to kind of revise those diagrams and try to figure out what's going on. Once they have a real question, we're much more likely to introduce reading that we think will help get at those questions. So the reading, I think a lot of faculty front load reading, and instead of waiting until they have a real reason to want to do that reading. So once they have a bunch of questions, we find readings that help them get at those questions. We often read Newton, which is hard, we excerpt it. But most of our reading is done in a shared Google Doc in teams of 4 or 5. And so they are commenting on the reading in the Google Doc, commenting on it to each other, and then I can see as the instructor where they're engaged and where they're confused, because I, in the Google Doc, can then see the comments that they've left. And when they all kind of bundle around some particular section, I'm like, oh, we could talk about this in class, because they had some cool ideas. So with almost, this is actually my grad class, this is our inquiry class, and almost any class I teach, most reading is done collaboratively in a shared doc. They can't avoid doing the reading. They could still probably skim it and leave a few comments, but they are going to have engaged with that reading because they've left some comments on that reading. And once another peer responds to their comment, it's on. Like, they're so excited that it doesn't become a thing anymore. They like want to comment on each other's posts. I bring it into class and say, this thing Caitlin said was so smart, let's pick up on that. So it does allow me to see their reading practice in kind of a reified way. Also collaborative. So in terms of the writing that's going on in the class the entire time, we write all the time, every moment. Notebooks, homework assignments, they're diagramming what's happening with the phenomenon. We don't collect everything. And my colleague Chris Fossum will say, if you're collecting every piece of writing, your students aren't writing enough. They can do tons of stuff that you don't touch, or that you check off, or good, you did it kind of thing. Like, they should be writing so much you couldn't possibly get to it all. For themselves, in their notebooks, whatever it is, in their writer's notebooks if it's a humanities class. So this is Cassandra's first homework assignment where we're trying to sort out color. And she says, while this may seem ridiculous, I'd like to explore this inquiry through an exploration of technology screens. Because we're asking them, how would you figure out this rainbow color thing? For example, a computer monitor or television can only depict the colors red, green, and blue in each pixel. However, we are clearly able to see each color on the monitor. This is created through the proximity of pixels, like a painting by Seurat. The rainbow may in fact be like a giant pointillism canvas filled with an infinite number of dots. And I walked them through the other day. There's a lot of stuff that Leslie could have ripped apart with this paragraph. Science writing doesn't often have exclamation points. Some redundancy. I'm going to explore an exploration. This is actually wrong. The science is wrong. That's not, in fact, what rainbows are doing. But it is week 1 of the science class, and we're going to get there. And Cassandra's going to come to understand how light works in such complicated ways because she's going to pursue the inquiry about how does this work. So what Leslie comments on is like the question. The question is smart. This is a question. Your group started looking at iPhone screens today, right? I'd love to see you do more with this. Like, why red, green, blue on light? What is it about that? How does a TV screen show a rainbow if it's only red, green, and blue? So excitement for the idea, generating, let's go back to this. What's really cool about, Leslie and I believe in students' rights to their own language, and so they actually coin their own terms in almost every class we teach. They'll come up with a science term that they have created that does not exist in any science book. This is our own class's term, which is why the papers at the end, they can't fake, right? So this is Cassandra. Her idea about Surratt spots gets picked up by the class. This is Leslie, actually. Our students often run in on Monday with things they've made. This is actually a ping pong ball with spaghetti, beer pong, that's what they have access to at Chico State. Ping pong ball with spaghetti, and he's like, I think this is what a light ray looks like. And we're trying to figure, they do this all the time without us asking, come in with a thing they've made. We've been studying that because I just think it's fascinating. And Cassandra's ideas start showing up in other students' homework. We talk about Surratt, we talk about pointillism. Is this what's really going on in the back of the retina, perhaps? And you'll start to see in their notebooks, this is another student who says, all Surratt spots make one set of overlapping round blobs. We're not clear yet. We're getting there. But I love that the ideas of another student start to get taken up. They end up arguing at the whiteboards all the time as they're trying to diagram, and this is Kate and Amy going back and forth. But you have multiple light rays coming off the same Surratt spot. But they're not actually coming off like the exact same spot because a light ray can't break. So it's like 2 light rays that are really, really, really close to each other. That's the problem though, because it's one single spot and it's got light rays going in all directions. It's not a bunch of little spots sending out a bunch of light rays. It's the exact same spot, but light doesn't do that. And then we're off. And then they're like, yeah, we got to figure this out. We got to really understand how this is working. Yeah, Scott.
Are you recording this, or is this being written down?
This is, because we have an NSF grant, we recorded every moment of that classroom for 5 years. Yeah. And then had grad students who could help us transcribe. Thank you, NSF. Yeah. At some point in the semester, definitions get important. So instead of giving them definitions up front, they realize that scientists make definitions because there's a moment when we need to define this. And there was a day where everyone looked around the room and realized everybody was defining focus differently on all the different whiteboards. Maybe we should have a shared definition of focus. So we start to sort some of that out on whiteboards and see if we can come to an agreement. SSRP becomes known as the Surratt spot reunification point in their homeworks and their papers. And then when they're ready, we start to introduce a series of homework assignments about 3 weeks out from the final paper where we feel like they can answer some of these questions, and it's really the parts of the paper. So we start with, what if we only had a retina on your skin? What would you see, given what you know about light and color in the eye? We've dissected eyes at this point. Then we add, what if the retina was inside a socket? And then we add, what if the socket had an iris? What if it gets a lens? What do lenses do? And as they're writing this homework, they're getting feedback from their peers, they're getting feedback from us in class, we're still diagramming, so they can take all those component parts at the end and finally put it in a paper. When we think the paper's ready, yeah, we do some heavy editing. That's when the part where we start to do like, is this science correct and are we doing some good editing? And the way that we approach that is we usually give a pretty heavy edit, and this is the answer to the question we were having last night over dinner. Like, so how do you, though, still introduce the teaching of writing in context? And some of that is instead of, if you have a 15-page paper, I don't edit for the student everything I find in 15 pages. I do a really heavy, with their permission, edit of the first page, maybe the first page and a half, and I identify pattern errors for them. And I show them how fun it can be, because it can be, to play with sentences, to like do some sentence combining, conflate some things, but only on a little tiny part, and then I ask them to try on those practices through the rest of that draft so the papers get better. I also trust that as the ideas get clearer, the sentences will get clearer. So it's okay to have a messy first draft. That means the idea is messy. And in fact, every time I try to write in something new, my sentences fall apart myself. I've made so many mistakes in email this semester because I just am too busy. Typos, those kinds of things. So you can kind of imagine that that's going to happen and that it will sort itself out. Every 5 weeks we do answer day, where the physicist and the biologist actually have a conversation with the students about what the Surratt spot unification point would translate to in scientific terms. And the students really do then understand the science because they've worked it out. They can ask Leslie all kinds of questions. Those are some of our best days because their questions are rich. Because they have been scientists for 15 weeks and they kind of understand the game we're playing in science. I said the other day we had this moment where Cassandra in class said, you know what I'm realizing is scientists just make this up. Like knowledge is constructed. That gravity wasn't always like a known thing. Like at some point someone played with that idea and she said, that's what we're doing. We're like making meaning. We're like constructing an idea. Like, yeah, yay, woo. We can all go home now. This is good. So I hope you can see this, and if not, I'll just kind of talk it through. I was trying to give you lots of ways you could take a pass at this. So what this says is you could return to the first two writing that you did, the thing about learning, how do we learn, and the thing about informal practices, and either in conversation with colleagues around you or on your own. For a while, for a little bit, I was thinking we could work through, do students have an opportunity to try on the ways people use writing in the world or in your discipline, in your class? Are there places you could infuse that, where you kind of break it down? How do you already support students having something to say, and how could you kind of up your game on that? Are you like, so for example, I'd ask myself, do all the papers look alike? Because if they do, you might want to swap up the assignment. So that and I'm going to talk in the next section about some role for student choice in there, so that maybe all the papers don't look identical, right? I always say to my grad students when they're like, I don't know if I'm going to get this stack of student essays. I'm like, you shouldn't hate getting a stack of student essays. That's the assignment. You should want to read it. Like, I'm looking forward to reading not all the time, not during finals week when I'm like, I'm so tired, but mostly I like getting my student work. And when I don't, I change the assignment, because why would I read something that I don't want to read? I'm really busy. I don't want to have wine while I'm grading. Where do students have opportunities to try out informal but disciplinary ways of making meaning in your classroom? And then you could think through maybe take an assignment and how is it deconstructed? So, every time I'm on my game and I actually journal about my teaching, I get to some point in the semester where I'm like, why are they not? And I go back and look and go, oh yeah, I never taught them that. That's why they're not doing that in the paper. We never talked about that. So maybe you could even take an assignment and break it down. So big picture here is I'm trying to say, get into some assignment or part of your class and see if there's some little element that you could tweak right now, either in conversation with colleagues around you or just on your own. Is that a thing that makes sense that you could do right now? Is that a reasonable thing? Do you have questions? Yes, Scott.
What do you I get all excited, but then I kind of start getting depressed because we teach an accelerated program. So the students have 8 weeks. They write a discussion board every Wednesday and a 3 to 5 page paper every Sunday.
Okay.
It's a machine.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing here, wow, good writing takes time.
Yeah.
You don't sit down once and just write it and you publish it. You got to take.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what we're expecting of our students. They work full time.
Right.
They go to class 6 to 10 at night.
Yep.
Or they're online.
Yep. No, it's real. So I do design for the constraints. Like, what are my constraints? And how do I have to adjust based on those constraints? So what's a reasonable amount that they can do in 8 weeks, right? Or can I at least have the ideas they're wrestling with in those 3 to 4 page papers be recurring ideas? So if I was having my students, a lot of my freshmen want to write about identity because that's so real for them right now. They're shifting identity. So they might have a series of papers that approach identity from like, what's my identity in a community? What's my identity online? What's my identity as an individual? So at least even if the papers are different, the idea is moving through a series. That's one way I do it when I'm trying to get them through something fast. Other people have other ideas? Yeah.
One way I attempt to approach this with something kind of formulaic, like we're describing, is to scaffold it so that I have a sliding, the points increase across time, so not every one of those papers is worth the same.
Yeah.
And the very first one we do together in class, so we have a mentor text that we look at, and then we do it together in class, and they get maybe 1 point for turning in exactly what we all created in
Yes.
class.
Yes.
So that they have accountability for it. So the next time, they partner up and they do it with a team, and they get slightly more points. And then the next time, they're trying it on their own, and so each time, the scaffolding decreases and the point value increases. So even though they're writing multiple papers, the only ones that really show their own, growth and insight are the very final ones where they're worth a little bit more. But we've had opportunity to do maybe some of these kinds of things, even in an 8, because I teach in an 8-week class as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I'm glad you brought up mentor text because I think that's a huge thing that we left off, right? The use of models as a way, we all do that. I go to a journal and I say, what do the articles look like? What do the openings look like? I borrow the structures of those genres, right? Yeah, Kathy.
I wanted to just piggyback onto what Beth said about points. One thing that Michelle got me to do is to stop thinking of 100 points as being the final total.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, and that you have to have percentages.
Yeah.
And so we don't. We design our all of our assignments, and we do scaffold them, and so then we may come up with 274 points.
Right. Yeah.
That's what.
And you're nursing, so you can do math, so that doesn't seem hard to you. I'm like, oh my God, I can't. I love that. Yeah. Yeah, but then does it for you, kind of.
The one downside of that is that you'll have maybe 4 things turned in that are worth low numbers of points, and then they divide it by the total number of, I got a C in this class.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm like,
No.
you don't.
To now. Yeah, right. Not for the whole. Yeah, that's great.
Talk about that.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
I-
that is something that we've
That's
been
great.
doing for about 4 years or 5 years now.
That's great.
And it's catching on to other people in our program.
Yeah.
Because it really gives you a latitude in being able to do what Deb talks about.
Yeah, freedom from like that. It has to be 100. Yeah. I think the big shift, and I know this is hard, is I think we have to stop thinking about writing is one thing and your content is something else. That you can't pull those apart. I'm sorry. The writing is in the service of your field, and so you have to teach writing in the way chemists and nurses use writing. There's no avoiding it. But what I think you can recognize is it doesn't mean you have to do something else. I don't think the English faculty are asking you to teach writing, and I think then we think essay is prose or something, like we think essays, not what's writing in your field. I'll bet they're writing all the time in your class. It's just we don't have broadened definitions of what counts as writing. So that diagram, that's writing. That ping pong ball with the spaghetti, I'm going to argue, that's a text. It's making a claim, actually, about how light works. And that's what scientists do, is make models. So the broadening of what counts might help with the, oh my God, I have to teach writing. Like, you're already teaching writing. But it's not this other thing. And then, yeah, the commas, I swear, will get better eventually, but maybe not in your class.
Well,
Yeah.
you frame writing as being an expression of an idea.
Yes.
You're learning to express ideas to others. It's that communication tool.
Yes.
And it varies within the
Disciplines, yeah, totally. The story I told the other day was trying to write with Leslie the first time. Our papers in humanities are usually 20 to 25 page things, lots of block quotes, lots of citing of the scholars that we're referencing. And when I went to write with her for the first time in a physics thing, they get 4 pages. And I was trying to figure out how to cite a block quote, that David Russell quote, the ball handling quote. And she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to figure out how to cite this block quote." And she said, "We ain't got time for that. There's no block quotes in science. What are you doing?" And I said, "I don't know how to say this." She said, "Well, either figure out how to say it in a sentence or get it out of there, because we don't do that." That was really hard for me to think, just totally throw away all the practices I had. But what Leslie was teaching me was that they don't have like Newton like brackets, because there's a way you've built on scientific knowledge that I don't need to cite that. I'm not going all the way back to gravity to cite it, which in humanities we often do. Let me go back 20 years and give you all the semicolon people who have done it, right? So I think that it's real, the communication and knowing who am I talking to and what counts as evidence is really different across the field. That's why freshman comp is so hard to teach. Yeah. So I do want to give you some time to like talk with each other. Think about if you could deconstruct an assignment. Think about how you're going to solve the problem of the 8-week thing. Like give you some to talk with each other about these problems of teaching writing. You good? Okay, go take a break. All those things. I'll be back soon. Okay, y'all. I'm gonna interrupt you. And do my little section 3, which is actually more radical. So now I'm gonna do what I do with my students. It's actually a little more like they have a lot more choice in the kinds of things they make. So I'm going to drill into the classroom level, and I think in this last little segment, which won't take as long, I'll also share some of the kind of practical things I do as a way to distribute the writing among the students and offload some of my labor to them, because I teach big writing classes and kind of need to do some of that. And so I think a lot about making and maker culture. The Make movement, is that familiar to you at all? Maker movement. You'll hear, there's a magazine called Make. Tinkering, a lot of campuses now have a maker space or a maker lab. So I think a lot about, especially coming off of the work with Leslie in science and students making those ping pong ball spaghetti things. I want to know why they making that, and what's the role of making in the disciplines. So how do engineers make versus how do physicists make versus what do humanists make, poems, those kinds of things. And in a world in which we're saying everyone should have a makerspace and a 3D printer on their campus, which I'm a fan of tinkering, but why? What's the discipline tie to that? Like making is not making any more than writing is not writing is not writing. So I love that actually make comes out of poesis, good old Wikipedia. Poesis, to make, though this word, the root of our modern poetry, was first a verb, an action that transforms and continues the world. And coming off of the campfire, you can also imagine why I'm really interested in something like that graffiti showing up there. Like, what do we make in times of trauma? We often make poetry and art as a way to heal. So I'd say the biggest, if you ask my students what goes on in my class, they would say choice. There's a ton of choice in my class of how they approach their assignments. And it's because I believe that writers should really wrestle with the problems of writing like writers do. No one gives me a template. I got to really decide, where am I publishing? What's the genre of that journal? What are the decision rules? Am I going to do a poster? Am I going to do a presentation? Am I going to give an Ignite talk? Am I going to do a podcast? I make those decisions, and they're hard. And I don't want to remove that hard writerly decisions from the students. I want them to actually encounter that over and over again. I don't know, who's your audience? Where do they publish? What kinds of things might you say? Where might you say it? And this is actually one of my favorite, Mark might even know Katie Woodray, this is for elementary school teachers. Perhaps our most important goal for students is that they come to see writing as a continuous process of decision making. And too often we strip the decision making from the students in our class around how they're going to do a paper, and we scaffold the shit out of that, right? We give them like so many rubrics and templates that it becomes a Mad Libs of writing a paper, right? Let me just plug in the word. And it's removed from anything they care about saying, right? Because we've now trying to get that paper perfect. And then we just get often a lot of papers we don't really want to read and they all look alike. So I wanted to avoid that. So I know this is too small, but I'm at least going to point you to Jody Shipka, who in my field, Tom and I will say, is fairly radical. So she's at the other end. I love Jody. She does amazing work, and she has a book called Toward a Composition Made Whole. Jody's students do things like write their essays on ballet slippers. Like radical stuff. And she has an assignment where she gives them a key term in the field, and they have to research, the origin of that word. They can make something around that word. So if she gives them a word like surveillance, and they research the history, then the student makes something for her. And she'll get things like, and I couldn't do this, this would scare the crud out of me. But her students will do things like leave a bag outside her office that's got a DVD she's got to pop in with the lights off, instructions for how to do it, and then it walks them through surveillance. So they take the word and create something out of that word. What I like from Jody's work is that, and here I'm just going to read this to you. She says, instructors working within this kind of framework of choice are still responsible for designing tasks with the goals and objectives. So when students come into our science class and we say we're studying light, color, in the eye, I'm not saying butterflies, right? It's not any choice. It's still bounded by my course. But rather than predetermining the specific materials and methodologies that students employ in service of those goals, tasks are structured in a way that asks students to assume responsibility for attending to some of these decisions. And maybe not all of them, but maybe you could let go of something. Maybe they don't have to write it in Word and print it out and turn it into you. Maybe you could let go of that. And they could say, I'm doing mine in Google Docs, or I'm going to do it, right? Maybe you could let go of something. So she's saying they should have control of the product they will formulate in response to the task. This might be a printed text, a performance, a homemade or repurposed object. It could be multimodal, digital, analog. They're going to decide the processes, sewing, searching online, woodworking, filming, recording. They're going to decide the process. They're going to figure out the resources they need. And this is the part that I think we never, and this is hard to do in school, I struggle with this, the conditions under which that final product will be experienced, the distribution of it, the choice of the distribution. I decide when I'm sending that paper to that journal. Sometimes there's deadline, but often I'm like, I missed that one, I'll do the next one. Shoot, I didn't see that one. So I try to think about this with students, and I give them this handout and say, I want you to think through. And I often teach my course in a series of make cycles. So every 2 weeks, they're responsible for making something that represents what they've learned in the class that week. And I get everything. I get websites to films to paper to essays, to actual essays. I get a range. And then I have them write a reflection about their process, what worked, what didn't work, what they were trying for, but it didn't work out so well because of the technology or whatever. Those reflections are the best. And I would show you this, but we have no sound. But I put the link, I'll show you, I have some resources. I get some of the most stunning student work when I give them the choice of what they want to make. Sylvia was moving from a long-time home and did this amazing video about literacy of a home, how you know to open a gate that gets stuck, how you know how to turn on the stove, like the things you learn about your home that when a guest comes over, you have to say, oh, the shower. I got to show you that you have to pull down and you have to hold, she captures all of that, what it looks like, a literacy of a home and how you come to know that from our literacy studies course. And so the kinds of things, and I'll show you a few of them on the website, the way that I offload some of it is, so then I have these range of things, a range of a lot of things, which I know the first question you think is, how do you assess that? So I have a few different structures that help me. One is I have a review board that's made up of students from the class that meet with me once a week. This rotates. And the review board and I look at the work that's been produced, and they decide which pieces we're going to feature in class on Monday. And then they come into class on Monday and they highlight 3 or 4 pieces of student work that they thought did a really nice job of capturing what we learned in those 2 weeks. And they have a conversation with the writer about the choices that she made, those kinds of things. So then the peers' work is all of a sudden in the room. It's highlighted by their peers. They feel so excited that their piece got chosen. And when I meet with the next review board, we're pretty careful about making sure that not the same person kind of gets repeated. So over the course of a semester, almost every student will have their work featured in some way that they did that was really cool. And then I have a team that's responsible as featured bloggers. I need my glasses. And what they do is do a write-up of what's gone on in our class that week. And that's posted on our website. So it ends up looking like, here's my website for a course. Let's see if the featured bloggers are right here. And if not, they're right here. I love it when I can't find a thing and a room of people are watching me. It's like my favorite thing. Okay, here's our featured bloggers. So they do a little write-up of the reading we did that week, what the takeaways were for that. They highlight some of their peers' work that they thought was really, really good, and we feature those in the blogs as well. They say why they picked those. They have a little author bio and their picture, and this is public. This is on the World Wide Web, which I tell them. It also gives me a chance to work with those featured bloggers in a really tight editing session. So where I maybe can't give a heavy edit on every paper, with the featured bloggers, they meet with me and we do like a real editor's pass at their work on the blogs because they're going to be public. It also connects us then to authors we're reading, because often people will see this who we're reading and then they reach out to us, which is amazing, and they get really excited. Oh my God, Shipka saw our stuff. We have those kinds of moments, so it also, celebrates the work that they're doing. So couple of practices around how I make sure that I'm not the only one who's responsible for reading and celebrating and giving feedback on the work. Lots of ways to distribute that to the class, and then they know that that's part of the process of the class. I never meet with we talked about this the other day, I don't ever meet with a student individually around their writing. I always have them come in trios, and they come having read the other two people's drafts, so that I actually am modeling how to do a writer's feedback session when they meet with us, and honoring that this is a thing we do. It's collegial, it's professional, and I don't want them to think the assignment is only going to me. I want to disrupt I'm the ATM machine, they put a paper in, I spit out a grade. I'm trying to disrupt that. Stop it. I know, there's a lot of people that's right, just give me the money. And then the other way I offload or manage reading all those drafts is everything they give to me has a memo attached to it. So they write, just like you would to an editor, hey, dear editor, here's my article I'm submitting. Here's where it is in the process. Here's what I need feedback on. Here's what I already know I need to revise, so don't worry about it, I got this. I tell them if they're having a bad day and they don't want us to say I think your title needs to be reworked. They say things in here like, don't touch my title. I really like it. So this is Zach's. This is a freshman and freshman comp. Dear reader, my conclusion would have to be the least developed so far. I feel as though it's a call to action, and I'm not sure if it's very strong. If you could please take a look at that and give suggestions on where I would go with it. Or if it looks okay, should I just keep it? Both the conclusion and the transitions between paragraphs may need some taking a look at. And they also, in their Google Docs, leave me comments like, I know these two paragraphs don't go together yet. I'm trying to figure it out. Or in blue, they might say, something smart goes here. That's what I do in my writing. Or, this conclusion's a placeholder, just ignore it. I know I need to rework it. They leave those notes for me in the middle of drafts. But I love that Zach says, and a lot of them do this, if you could write full sentences of why something doesn't make sense or what I could put in instead of what I have, because just writing revise wouldn't be helping me out with what's exactly wrong. So awkward, revise, not as helpful for the writer. Anyway, have fun reading, and thank you. So they do this usually at the top of a Google Doc or sometimes on a separate piece of paper, whatever works for them. And when we are attending to the revision, we read this first and try to honor what the writer wants for feedback. And then when they give us a revision, they say, here's what I changed, here's what I ignored, and why, just like I do to an editor. And in fact, I show them those email exchanges between editors and I, where I say, we incorporated reviewer one's comments, but reviewer two is WAC, and I'm not doing that. I mean, I say it nicely, but I'm not going back and redoing my data set. So thanks for playing. I'm moving on to another drift. So I want us to kind of think through, maybe we could have this conversation of like, how do we open up possibilities for students' control, and maybe where you could give up some student choice in your assignments, or give up so that they have some choice in their assignments. Could they choose the topic? Could they choose the platform it's composed in? Could they choose, we often crowdsource our rubrics. So after the students have produced a draft and they know the kinds of things that might go in it, then as a class, we put those up and we create a rubric together. So we honor the kinds of ways that writing assignment worked out. Because sometimes I'll write an assignment and then nobody did X. And they're like, yeah, that was hard and we need help with that. Well, I can go back and fix that. So I give up I offload a lot of those things to them. So I know you keep talking to each other a lot, but I wonder if you might be open to having that kind of a conversation. Or you can go back to the conversation you had. And since I think I only have one more slide, what I might also leave up here is I put a ton of resources, including example student work, on this URL. So tinyurl.com writing Lewis U, and I'll leave that up there. It's a Google Doc that Tom's going to add to as well, with just a bunch of the resources and things, the slides from today, all those kinds of things. I'm thinking it might be good to talk about where you could have room for choice, and then we could just open it up to maybe a conversation and questions. Okay, so I'm going to put you back into like having a conversation with each other. Karen just nodded and said that was okay. So. At Tom's request, y'all, I gotta get this back on. In the last couple minutes here that we have left, Tom is asking, and he's right, even though we're all tired. I was like, no, but we're tired. Maybe just share out a little bit of the thing you just talked about, or some questions, or some things you'd like me to put on that shared doc. I'm always like, where are my glasses? If you go to this. So, I don't know, what are some takeaways from our 3 hours? Now it's I don't know, there's 900 things.
The power of positive reinforcement.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, you can do this. Success.
Just the idea that composing is taking place all over, while you're driving, when you're writing
Yes.
the book. I never thought of that as
Yeah.
the writing process.
Yep. I couldn't sleep last night because I was giving this talk, and I kept wanting to futz with the slides, and finally I was like, you have to go to sleep. Yeah.
What I took away is kind of going behind the curtain with the class.
Yeah.
I never actually show my students what I do or how I do it, and we just expect them to turn something in. So it's kind of I'm going to show you the process.
Yeah.
Go behind the curtain and open it up.
Yeah. And they get all excited because it feels like we are letting them into the professional secret door. Oh, you're treating me like a grown-up. Already.
I was going to say too, you have a finite amount of time, 16 weeks, 8 weeks in some cases. So you can't really extend that, but you can change the frequency with which they write.
Yes.
So you can do more writing in the same amount of time.
Yeah.
And we know that it's a developmental process that takes quite a long time, but repeating the activity in some form or another is absolutely key.
Yeah. And know that they'll hopefully keep repeating it. Right. Yeah. Remind me your name again.
Therese.
Thanks, Therese. Yeah.
Students need writing assignments that are interesting to them, and they need a lot of choices.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't have to be self-prescriptive.
Yeah. We could let go of something. Yeah. I will argue that the biggest access and equity issue for us is that I do a survey of all the freshmen, so I get about 1,700 responses at the beginning of every semester around what kinds of technologies they have access to. They are all coming with laptops and phones and tablets. They don't have a printer. 20% have a printer. So when you ask them to print something out, it's actually really hard for them. That's really expensive to get toners. So that's probably your practice. You probably like reading on a hard copy. but it's not their practice. And Google Docs is the great equalizer because the paper can't get lost. You can see the revision history. It's either in Google Docs or it ain't, right? But even just allowing them to use their composing platform and emailing it or uploading it to Blackboard or whatever the thing is can be a real equalizer for the student who can't afford and can't say to you that they can't afford. When I ask them over and over again, if someone doesn't turn in an assignment, I ask, like, so what happened, Karen? Why didn't you turn in the assignment? Often they'll be like, I ran out of ink and I didn't think you'd take it late. Or, I'm like, oh, I don't even have to do hard copies. Oh, no, just email. Oh, I can email it to you? Absolutely. Will you take points out? No. Give me the thing. We good. Happy to have it. Thank you for writing it. So yeah, those material conditions and the choice, and some of them will say to me, I'd prefer to print it out. I'm like, great, that's awesome. Give me a hard copy. Sheila.
So I really appreciate your emphasis on students needing to have something to say, and that's where we come in, is to really help them at the beginning to generate something useful to say.
Yep. Thanks for saying that. I was saying it's so hard. I was talking to you about there are disciplines that have real canonical things they need to know. And I am going to ask Leslie, my physics colleague, she has a really beautiful broken down assignment around teaching force. Because there's things she has to teach in physics because they're going to go on to a next class that needs to know these things. But she still has some inquiry within having to teach that canonical thing. And I know it takes a long time to break down those assignments, but I know she'd be willing to share some of those. So I'll put that on this shared doc too. Yeah, Karen.
I was, just sort of to riff off that, I was thinking about all the reading assignments that I give in my Intro to Philosophy class that I am constantly trying to figure out how to make sure my students actually read them.
Yeah.
And you've just given me so many ideas to think about, like, make them need to read it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, or want to read it.
Yeah.
And it just made me think a lot about how much less content delivery I could be doing and how many more questions they could be asking that they might actually want answers to, that then they would have to work at the text in a different way to find. Yeah, that's good. And I really do love, at least a few times a semester, throwing that reading into a shared something that we're annotating together. And there's a lot of platforms that allow you to do that now. Perusal, there's a whole bunch that will let you put a PDF in it and let your students annotate collaboratively. And man, you learn so much about where they're stuck or what they like. Perusal. I'll put the link on this Google Doc too. Perusal will let you put almost anything in there that then they can collaborate in teams. And then Hypothesis is a way to do web annotations. I'll put all those links in there. Yeah.
I just want to affirm you, because I think I came with neutral feelings about spending 3 hours here this morning.
Totally.
I caught the energy.
Thanks.
I really appreciate
thanks.
And I have a feeling you've never done the same thing twice. I get the impression it's always expanding.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. It's hard to come to a new context. Tom and I have talked about this. Like, you have really high functioning, amazing faculty here. I mean, the last few days, and especially those of you who are in the room at the end of a semester for 3 hours, at the end of are already pretty high functioning. So I'm always a little bit like, oh, but you're already doing such cool stuff. I don't even need to come do that. So yeah, you have amazing faculty here, like for real. And your students yesterday were pretty awesome too. So yeah. Okay, I will keep adding to this doc. Tom will have it even if you've lost the URL or whatever for it. Tiny URL, Lewis.
Send that out to everybody.
Yeah, that'd be great. And he and I will keep adding some more things to it too. It does have things on here like, in case you're like, then you forget. Like, it really does have full lesson plans for how to do things like silent science and stuff. So that Leslie and I mostly have created. So I'm hoping, like that whole reading practice, like journal clubs and stuff like that, there's a whole breakdown, and you can share this with students, the kinds of things students do with it. So that's what's there on those links. So in case it's helpful. When you're rested and you've bathed and you've showered and you've had a glass of wine and you feel like returning to your class again, then you can go back to the resources. Thank you. Thanks for playing along. Appreciate you all. Yeah.